one has to be a permissible donor to give to political parties in the United Kingdom. Those rules are drawn very, very broadly, but we need to very generally, you have to be resident of the United Kingdom or registered as an overseas elector. So they'll be looking at that in particular, because one of the concerns that has been raised is perhaps these donations were coming from an impermissible donor. The second thing that they will be looking at is whether there has been an attempt to disguise the fact that the original donor, if you will. And we can actually draw on one case and one case only where this has been prosecuted in the past. This was in 2023.
So this morning there's more scrutiny into Reform UK's finances as the Times reveals that police are now investigating £500,000 worth of donations made by Fiona Cottrell, the mother of convicted fraudster George Cottrell. The investigation was led by Gabriel Pogrund, Insight editor for The Times.
We understand that the Electoral Commission examined the sums she gave. It seems in particular 2 instalments of £250,000 received before that 2024 election, in which Farage, on the 8th time of asking, was finally elected to the House of Commons. And the particular piece of the statute book they're examining relates to situations where the ultimate source of a donation has been disguised in order to permit an impermissible donor from depositing funds into the coffers of a political party, or where false statements have been made about a donation to a party.
That's Gabriel Pogrund. You can read that story on the front page of The Times and at thetimes.com. And on the app this morning, there are almost 3,000 comments on that article. If you'd like to join the conversation there, you can do so with your digital subscription. Let's give you more detail on where we find ourselves this morning and talk to Sam Power, lecturer at Bristol University and an expert in political financing and electoral regulation. Sam, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. It's good to speak to you. Just help us understand what will have triggered the involvement of the police in this particular circumstance.
Yeah, so particularly as it relates to donations of this kind, the Electoral Commission has an investigatory function and it can make some small sanctions, but they are civil. But in this case, because it's about particularly Section 61 of the Political Parties Elections and Referendums Act, that can only be investigated after the Electoral Commission have seen that there might be something worthy of note by the police, and then prosecuted indeed by the Metropolitan Police as well. So the Electoral Commission have had a look and they think there is further investigations to do and potentially prosecutions by the police.
And can you help us understand also, and perhaps we can speak more broadly at this point, as to what they will be looking for? So when it comes to donating to a political party, what are some of the parameters as to how that donation can actually legally work?
So I think they'll be looking at two things in particular, and we'll speak very, very generally about this. Number one is the question of permissibility. So one has to be a permissible donor to give to political parties in the United Kingdom. Those rules are drawn very, very broadly, but we need to very generally, you have to be resident of the United Kingdom or registered as an overseas elector. So they'll be looking at that in particular, because one of the concerns that has been raised is perhaps these donations were coming from an impermissible donor. The second thing that they will be looking at is whether there has been an attempt to disguise the fact that the original donor, if you will. And we can actually draw on one case and one case only where this has been prosecuted in the past. This was in 2023. Somebody called Gary Platt, who was given a suspended sentence for donations made to David McIntosh, the former Conservative MP. And what happened in that case was he was given money by a third party, a different company. He then provided that to David McIntosh as his own money and gave a fake letter that said it was his own money that he was giving. So what they'll be looking at is, one, whether the original source was permissible, I think, and two, whether there was some kind of attempt, if it was not permissible, to hide the true source of the donation.
Understood. And we will just say at this point that Nigel Farage has said in the sort of last few days that the money given in his direction certainly was for a sort of personal gift and contribution that way. Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform UK this morning, has said that George Cottrell and Fiona Cottrell, to his understanding, are permissible donors in all of this, and Richard Tice only found out about this investigation as the Times reported it. Sam, let's go on then to, I suppose, try to work out what all of this means in the context of the multiple sort of donations and question marks, because there is another £1 million donation, according to The Guardian, that was deposited to the company belonging to Richard Tice, Reform UK's deputy leader. Some of that was then donated to Reform UK as well. And I ask that because there are multiple strands to this. This is the only one, it seems, that the Metropolitan Police is investigating. Does that suggest, what's your understanding or analysis of the fragmentation of the various parts of institutions that are looking at this, whether it's the Met Police in this context, the Standards Commission, albeit it's paused in the context of a by-election, and just the kind of unknowns as well at this point? It's just quite a broad and far-reaching conversation we're having to have.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, the £1 million donation or gift, whatever it might be, that the Guardian are reporting on, seems to be being investigated by the National Crime Agency. So it is all getting incredibly complex.
Yeah, and they said they couldn't find the original source, I think, of that money, didn't they, previously? Precisely.
They're a bit worried about the original source of the donation, and I think, looking into various things that the National Crime Agency looks into as it relates to that. What this sort of points to more broadly, I suppose, is how incredibly complex electoral law is for those trying to follow it, but also because of that complexity, it does leave various holes that one can get around if they know what they're doing. So I think what we're looking at is lots of different people that might have received donations and lots of different ways in which they either may have had to declare those donations. In the case of the £5 million gift from Christopher Harborne, that's a matter of the MP's Code of Conduct, so it's not a legal issue. We then have the question of the provenance of money in the case of the National Crime Authority, and then we have the case of whether donors themselves are trying to hide where that donation has come from. So it's all incredibly messy, and it's all incredibly complex. But at the heart of it, I think what we see is concern amongst the public about the way in which these finances are being run. And actually the story, despite being quite complex and messy, is quite simple at the end of the day. People look at something like a £5 million gift that maybe hasn't been declared and think, does that look right? So we sort of move beyond legal tests of permissibility and get to the altogether more important test for politicians, actually, which is the sniff test. Does it smell right to the public? And I think what Reform are finding, perhaps, is that they may well pass the legal test, much higher bar, but they are perhaps failing that much more important test, actually, the sniff test.
Yeah. Sam, your clarity is very, very warmly welcomed. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you ever so much.
Thank you. That's Sam Power from Bristol University, who is, as you've just heard, an expert in political financing and electoral regulation. And so I think there are broader questions from a situation like this that Sam's just outlined, which is how to address wider issues in political financing if they're kind of under a new and renewed spotlight this morning. We've already heard from Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, on the programme this morning. You should go and read the Times front page, this latest chapter of this investigation by the Insight team, the Sunday Times Insight team, which is reported on the front page this morning. And of course, questions about the by-election, which will rumble and rumble for the next few weeks.